Hello, my name is Amy Niklash, and I'd like to introduce you to Gauging Comprehension. I am a current sixth grade teacher at Reciprocal Intermediate School, and I am the lead facilitator for the new teacher community or beginning teacher community at Muskegon ISD. So today I wanted to bring some information to try to help educators bridge that gap between comprehension and learning enough and comprehending enough where they are able to use this information at a later time to apply or create new learning. So hopefully you're going to find today to be beneficial to you. We will be looking at reciprocal teaching, a strategy that is able to be used across content areas, ability levels, and age levels. So hopefully today's presentation, you will find it to be beneficial. So let's go ahead and look at our learning goals today. Teachers will be able to learn and understand the roles of reciprocal teaching. Teachers will be able to understand the research behind reciprocal teaching and how it can benefit all learners. And teachers will be able to consider how reciprocal teaching could be implemented into their practice. Right now, looking at those three learning goals, which one do you think will apply to you the most as far as expanding your practice, or which one do you think that you would be most interested in learning more about? Go ahead and have that brief discussion with your partner or someone at your table. Okay, since this is a pre-recorded presentation, if you are able to get in a large discussion circle with the learners in your group or team that you're learning with today, that would be great. We're going to get into a large group, and as we get into this group, I would like you to start to think about two things. I want you to think about learners and their profile. How do they learn? What might be some areas of strengths that you know for your students that you can recall? What may be some significant roadblocks that you see within specific students or within classrooms? Or probably another good way to frame it would be if you had to narrow down the number one obstacle you find in your classroom to being able to move forward with high level content and apply that learning in a different fashion at a later time. So, with that as our frame, I would like you to think about the underperforming students in your classroom to identify what commonalities they share pertaining to teaching and learning. I'll give us a few minutes to think about that question, and then we will report out. Okay, now that we have been able to kind of gauge what some of those commonalities are in struggle for students who are not performing where they should be or who are underperforming, I would like you to think again now about this next question. Please consider what types of supports these learners might need to complete a literacy task, such as reading an article to write an effective summary. So, what would you do as a classroom teacher for any underperforming or struggling student, or all your students in general? Maybe if you wanted to look at it through the scaffolding lens, that would be suffice. What types of supports do you think these learners might need? And we will share out. I'm sure many of us spoke to the idea of comprehension being a significant struggle for many of our students. And we're starting to see this struggle be more apparent, especially as non-ELA teachers are beginning to embed those literacy standards into their core content instruction. One of the difficulties with that is that students who struggle with comprehension struggle to get in the information or take in the new learning to be able to process it and use it and apply it in another lesson or another activity down the road in those classrooms. So what we're finding is most students are getting stopped at the first step, comprehension, building that prior knowledge. So today we're going to talk about a strategy that is quite effective in helping to bridge that gap of comprehension and comprehension skills in a classroom. Many of us know that our classrooms now are not based upon skill level necessarily. We're getting very little pullout in many of these core content areas. So there is a pressing need with mixed ability levels and reading levels that we need to find strategies that work for all students and not just one grouping of students. So today we're going to talk about reciprocal teaching. Reciprocal teaching is a great activity to embed in really any classroom, maybe third through secondary. And it is a strategy that can be used with diverse learners, whether that be ability level, whether that be age level, whether that be in terms of content area as well. So what I want you to think about today as we go through this piece, how could reciprocal teaching benefit your practice? Or would you consider implementing this strategy into your practice? So we talked a little bit about the role of literacy within each content area, and it's not no longer being found just in the ELA classroom. With that being said, let's look at this next quote here and kind of process it. And what I would like you to do after we read this quote together and process it, I want you to think about what does it mean to you, and then I would like you to find a partner in the room in which you guys can both discuss what it means to you, and then draw a combined image to share out that represents what this quote means to both you and your partner. So the idea is not that content area teachers should become reading and writing teachers, but rather that they should emphasize the reading and writing practices that are specific to their subjects. So students are encouraged to read and write like historians, mathematicians, and other subject area experts. So right now I would like you just to kind of reflect on that piece for a minute. And we look at some of those roadblocks that we've talked about a little bit: training, time, comfort, skill level, knowledge. So what does this quote mean to you? And I would like you just to reflect on that for a moment. And then you are able to go ahead and find a partner and you both can discuss what this quote means to you. And then please draw a collective image to represent what that quote means to both of you. So maybe some of you right now might be reflecting and thinking, why? Why such an emphasis on literacy? Why is there a push into other cores besides English language arts? And, maybe there's fear that's going along with this, as many secondary teachers do not have training in teaching reading in the basis of writing or literacy. So what is this push all about? And I think this next quote will kind of help us. Why literacy? Adolescents entering the adult world in the 21st century will read and write more than any other time in human history. They will need advanced levels of literacy to perform their jobs, run their households, act as citizens, and conduct their personal lives. And we can see here the 4 C's of 21st century skills, which begin with a critical thinker, solving problems, a communicator, understanding and communicating ideas, collaborator, working with others, and creator, producing high quality work. And I think what you're going to find today is a correlation between the 4 C's of 21st century learning and reciprocal teaching, and how the practice of reciprocal teaching can actually hit all those 4 core areas of 21st century skills. So let's dig a little deeper into what reciprocal teaching is. It is an instructional activity that asks students and teachers to share the role of a teacher by allowing them to both lead the discussion about a given reading. So this reading can be fiction, nonfiction. It could be book clubs. It could be small groups. There's many variations of text that you can use and how you use those texts in reciprocal teaching. The great thing is that it activates metacognition. It constructs the meaning of the text. So kids are thinking about their thinking. They're thinking about what they are reading, which we know are all attributes of a strong reader. Students internalize their own thought processes about the text and how they relate to their group members' ideas. So again, this layer of processing what they know about the text and then listening to what their group members may know really helps those who struggle with comprehension, because maybe they're going to pick up a piece that their neighbor picked up that they did not. And it will again help to build that foundational understanding in which they can continue to comprehend the text. Reciprocal teaching involves 4 strategies that guides discussion: predicting, questioning, question generating, summarizing, and clarifying. And we know all 4 of those skills help to significantly increase comprehension. And it includes small group participation where each student is actively involved while monitoring comprehension. I can tell you from my past experience of using reciprocal teaching in my classroom, it fosters significant engagement. And we'll talk more about how we can do those things to make sure engagement is there. But if it is implemented with fidelity, reciprocal teaching is a strategy that can really help any classroom teacher use background knowledge from text in a different light later down the road, because the reading being done to prepare for a specific learning target is comprehended at high levels due to this strategy. So let's dig a little bit deeper into these specific roles that make up the reciprocal teaching strategy. And you're going to find that these roles connect with good practice or reading skills that we've been teaching our students, hopefully since coming to school. So we begin with a predictor, and the predictor asks students to predict what they think the reading may be about, giving them time to think about what's going to happen by asking questions like a detective might do. So usually when we start with any type of reciprocal teaching, the predictor is the role that begins right away for most students, whether it be in a group setting or as a class. And usually my predictor is usually my lowest reader in the beginning. I tend to find predictor being the easiest strategy or role to implement, and usually maybe my less confident or my struggling reader can be the predictor to start. And then there's the questioner, and they remind students to generate questions as they listen and read. So they are going to ask significant questions and continue to ask other students about what they are reading. Clarifier, as students listen and read, they remind them to ask themselves what words and phrases are unclear to them. These clarifications may take the form of the following questions. So often this is your vocabulary piece. This is your vocabulary expert, where they oftentimes will have a computer or device with them to help them clarify some of the unknown words as the group progresses through the reading. And the summarizer. Students can identify the main ideas and details in paragraphs and in multi-text. They also compare and contrast the overall structure of the text. Students determine the themes and summarize poems, dramas, or literature. And usually my summarizer is my most gifted or most skilled student that literacy maybe is not as challenging for. Eventually we get to a part where we get comfortable enough where students know whatever group they're placed in, they need to vary their roles as we continue to use this strategy throughout the year. So when you go to group kids, mixed ability, small groups is best for this. So usually I take a low, a high, and two mediums when I'm making my group if possible. I designate one student as a teacher within each small group to make sure it's running smoothly, or a manager. The teacher student will help to keep their small group on task and ensure they move through each of the 4 steps. The summarizer is academically skilled and the predictor tends to struggle. And once students are more comfortable, roles can be altered. So before we begin this, I again teach these skills in isolation first. And I just embed it into my social studies instruction if that's where I'm at for that day, if we're using an article. But hopefully with an aligned K-12 curriculum, by the time they get to you in secondary or upper elementary, these should be skills that are common practice. Oftentimes I find I have to reteach how to summarize, and I teach that separately with a specific strategy that I use. So all students can help write that summary together at the end of the activity. So right now would be a good time to look at some process questions to kind of recap what we've been talking about thus far. So within a group at your table, or if you want to get up and move and find a group to speak with. But these are the 4 questions I want you to consider. Which role of reciprocal teaching do you feel would benefit your skill set as a learner or as a teacher? Which role of reciprocal teaching do you feel would be the most challenging? Think about students in your classroom. What would your students need to be able to perform each role of the reciprocal teaching effectively? And how would you proceed as a teacher to teach this strategy? So this would be a good time for you to discuss these 4 questions within your group. So what do you think might be the benefits of reciprocal teaching? Reciprocal teaching is a great way to teach students how to determine important ideas from a text while discussing vocabulary, developing ideas and questions, and summarizing information. It can be used across several content areas. It works particularly well with textbooks, nonfiction texts, articles, and book clubs. So again, you can start to see or imagine possibly how engagement is going to be strong because each student has a defined role and they know the others in their group are depending on them to do their task or their job assigned to complete the activity. Also, as students are performing their role, if they're struggling with their role, they have the other 3 around, the other 3 involved in the group to help support their thinking. Or if they're a really low reader, they're going to start to hear the thoughts and the thinking of those around them, which will also help to boost, hopefully, their comprehension. Along with our high-end learners, they're practicing, they're engaging, they're thinking. So one of the best benefits of reciprocal teaching is definitely the level of engagement due to the responsibility of performing the role and the amount of practice by all levels of students that can be implemented when using this strategy. So we've talked a little bit about how the ELA standards are very similar to the content literacy standards of social studies. And here's just a slide that kind of explains that. You can see how they really mirror each other in many ways, and that they can, it really leads for teachers to be able to include literacy within their core because some of these skills take years to develop and they're very, very challenging. On average, we know kids leaving post-secondary education or upon entering post-secondary education are on average 2 years behind in their literacy skills. We really can't equate to enough practice at this point. So by looking through this, you can start to see that they're very, very similar to English language arts standards. And this is also the push that you're seeing between many combined ELA and social studies classes. That's the new current trend. I've been able to participate in a classroom like that, and it was amazing. The learning was very deep. The literacy was the focus. It was the skill building. but then the context or the knowledge was social studies concepts. It made the learning real, and gave kids purpose. So I really, really enjoyed having that combination because they fit together so nicely. On this next slide, you can kind of see this relationship or this correlation between English language arts and social studies, which also lays a great foundation for project-based learning. So here's just an example of a typical task that could be used, combining disciplinary literacy and the literacy skills of the Common Core. So we're looking at that content crossover. You could use reciprocal teaching to target practice of the ELA skills embedded within ELA Common Core while using content standards as context. So, for example, you could have students read and comprehend the article. Maybe it's on gun control or another current event issue. And then they're going to, in their small groups of 4, read the article using the reciprocal teaching strategy. You can see here that I hit that social studies standard where I'm evaluating from different perspectives, examples of cooperation and conflict within the region under study. Within this particular article, it gave arguments for and against gun control. And then you can see the ELA skills that I'm able to hit as well. Effectively engage in a range of collaborative discussions. And that's actually a speaking and listening standard. And then you can see the predictor actually ends up being RI 6.1, cites textual evidence to support analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences from the text. The clarifier is RI 6.4, determine the meaning of words and phrases. The questioner is RI 610, by the end of the year, comprehend literacy in the ages 6-8 text complexity. And the questioning, to be able to comprehend, we're asking those questions that support that piece there. And the summarizer, RI 6.2, determines the central idea of a text and writes a summary. So you can see here, by doing one set of reciprocal teaching or one process loop, how many ELA skills you could hit. I did not include in this the social studies literacy standards, but again, those mirror the ELA literacy standards, and you would hit a number one of those as well by doing just this one activity. The next slide is actually classroom footage of a social studies classroom that is implementing reciprocal teaching to learn social studies content. And before we begin that, I'm going to move us forward to these 3 questions to think about as you're watching this video clip. What do you notice from the video footage? What do you wonder from the video footage? And what examples of scaffolding did you identify? So we're going to watch this video clip and then have a group discussion over those questions. To participate in a two pair make a four square activity. To begin with, you're going to find a new partner around the room, and you're going to think about these three process questions from what we've learned so far. What is one word you would use to describe the difference between an expert and a novice reader that is reading disciplinary text? What skills may be needed to read disciplinary literacy successfully? And how do the Common Core literacy standards incorporate disciplinary literacy into educational programming? So, those are the three questions I want you to consider. And before we begin, you are going to find a partner not at your table. You're going to reflect and discuss the following questions in a pair. So, please go through those three questions and share out. You have about 2 to 3 minutes to do that. And at the end of that time, then your two pair is going to make a four square. You'll meet with another pair and share and discuss your thinking and your ideas around those three questions. Now that you've seen a model within a classroom, let's practice this as a group or a team. So try to place yourself in a group of four. And I will go over the instructions. You're going to find a lot of these materials already at the tables. So as a group, please be sure to have a large sheet of paper, markers, reciprocal teaching task cards that define each role, and the text set of articles. Please view the text set and choose an article that your group is interested in reading. Please set your large sheet of paper up to reflect the four quadrants. Each role within the strategy will have a quadrant to write their learning down to fulfill the task of your assigned role. And decide which role of reciprocal teaching strategy you will be assigned, and read your task card to support the completion of the task. So this is in a way that you could step by step take your kids through a practice of how to implement that. So right now in your teams, please complete those 4 steps and make sure that you understand what task you must fulfill for reciprocal teaching. Now that you have been assigned a role and you know what your task is, let's go through the structure of how I would run a reciprocal teaching session within my classroom. You will start with with predicting and previewing. The predictor will lead a 5-minute discussion that will preview the text of your chosen article. Remember, choice is very, very important in fostering engagement and interest. So anytime I do this activity, I make sure that choice is embedded somehow, some way within the activity itself. You will then silently read your article and perform your assigned role. Use the quadrant of the paper to write down any notes or learning that pertains to your role. So if you have as you're reading, go ahead and feel free to, if you're the questioner, write down those questions in that spot. If you have words that are unknown or phrases, go ahead and write those down, clarifier. Predictor, you can continue to make predictions throughout. In summarizer, if you have any ideas that you think will lead to a very solid summary, go ahead and write them down at this time. You will then, after you get your article finished, you will then have a post discussion. So within the next 10 minutes, you will discuss your article as each role shares out their learning. So you will share what you read in the article, and each role will go ahead and share the learning that they wrote down on their piece of paper. Summarizer, after listening to all the learning from the post discussion, you will then write the summary using the knowledge gained from the discussion. And after every group has written their summary, at this point, we will then have a summary share out as a large class to add another layer of comprehension to this article. So you can see how many layers and how many opportunities students have to comprehend the text. When we do close readings, often students don't like to take the time to stop and get all the information when reading. This activity, because it has so many steps and so many layers, really creates a situation where kids have to interact with the text numerous times to complete the strategy, which that in itself really helps to bridge the gap in comprehension. And the skill level of the Common Core literacy embedment is extremely difficult. And we find that sometimes we even read what the standard is asking, and it's challenging as a teacher to interpret. And I thought this did a great job of explaining, what is the difference between an expert reader who reads to the level of the Common Core standards and those who are novice. And you can start to see the differences here in this text. And this is an example from a historical text. So an expert seek to discover content and know content, where novices only seek to know content. Experts ask what the text does, what is the author's purpose, and novices ask what the text says or the facts of the text. Experts understand the subtext of the writer's language. Novices understand the literal meaning of the writer's language. Inferring is very hard for a novice reader usually. See any text as a construction of a vision of the world, where novices see the text as a description of the world. See text made by the person with a view of events, where novices see text as accounts of what really happened. So that idea of perspective there embedded into this piece. Consider textbooks less trustworthy than other kinds of documents, and then novices consider textbooks to be very trustworthy. Experts assume bias in text, where novices assume neutrality, that objectivity in text. Experts consider word choices and tone, where novices ignore word choice and tone. Experts read slowly, and there's a social exchange between two readers, the actual and the mock, where the novices read to gather lots of information. Experts are able to resurrect text like a magician, where novices process text like a computer. Compare text to judge different, perhaps divergent accounts of the same event or topic, and novice learn the right answer. Get interested in contradictions, where novices resolve or ignore contractions. Check sources of document, read the document only compared to a novice there, and read like a witness to a living involving events, where novices read like seekers of solid facts. I don't know about you, but the first time that I actually reviewed this chart, I was definitely in the novice category. So that pendulum switch that most educators are going to have to make themselves from a novice reader to an expert reader within their own discipline is a jump for educators first. And then as we start to gain that understanding, those differences, we can really start to embed that into our practice and help kids see the difference between a novice reader and an expert reader of disciplinary literacy. So if you tend to find disciplinary literacy very challenging, hard to teach, hard to understand the difference, and this is why. If we look at this next visual here, we can see all the foundational ELA skills and knowledge that an average reader must have to be able to read as a historian. They need to understand author's purpose, author's perspective, the difference between credible and non-credible sources, the difference between primary and secondary sources. They need to understand tone of the author, bias of the author, word choice, which then all can lead to a foundational understanding of text structures. And once we have that piece of understanding text structures, we can make inferences, and then we can start to begin to read like a historian. So you can see how going back and looking at your alignment, K-12 is very important in this piece, because kids need to have these foundational ELA skills to be able to read as a social scientist or a scientist or a mathematician as they move into specific content areas. So as educators, how do we go about implementing and preparing our students to independently use reciprocal teaching within your classroom? These are some of the things that I've come up with through trial and error. The first thing would be to model the strategy in its entirety using a video or with 4 teachers. I found that beginning with a model for kids to see the parts of the process is the best way to do it in the beginning. Pre-teach each role separately using picture books or well-known story, which allows students to focus on the process, not comprehension. So I usually find a trade book that goes along with maybe one of my social studies topics, such as refugees, or another topic that I would use. And then I would use that text to teach each role. Now, again, if you know that your core instruction is very solid up to this point, where kids understand how to complete the role of a predictor, a clarifier, a summarizer, and a questioner, you maybe can skip that role, but I would definitely try as you implement and see where you're at, and if you're struggling, I'd go back and teach each role there. I have some strategy cards, and those are linked in this presentation. And the strategy cards are basically reminders to each person within the strategy what their job is. And it kind of helps students, and it guides them as they work through the process of each role. Use large posters and groups to organize the learning embedded within each role, which can become a formative assessment check. I use a big, large butcher paper, and I divide it into 4 quadrants where each role will write their information. And then that is my formative assessment check for, first of all, number 1, are they able to complete the activity the way it should be carried out? Was their comprehension of the text? Were they getting the main ideas that I wanted them to gather? Group students in mixed ability groups, including high achieving, average readers, and struggling readers. That's very important to bring that low reader up. And as students learn their role, they in time can switch roles within their group. So after we get this up and going for a while in my classroom, oftentimes what I will do is, all right, we're going to meet in our book clubs today. We're going to be using the reciprocal teaching strategy. Please pick a strategy that you have not used before. So we really want kids to be able to practice all 4 of those strategies. And then teach students how to summarize fiction and nonfiction text before beginning the reciprocal teaching process. So definitely make sure that your kids know how to summarize, and there's 2 different strategies that you can use for fiction and nonfiction. But I have found in 6th grade that summarizing is very difficult and challenging, and every year that needs some time spent on it to make sure then when I ask kids to get into their reciprocal teaching groups, that they can independently as a group complete those summaries. In addition, we can start to look at the results of reciprocal teaching and how impactful and effective it is when used in the classroom with fidelity. These are some of the research findings that I was able to pull up to support the use of this strategy in the classroom. In 15 days, students are more confident. Low-performing students do well with reciprocal teaching. Struggling readers grow 1 to 2 years in 3 to 6 months, and that was significant for me because I have found that students in my classroom were ranging from all over the place as far as ability level, and I know that I was closing the margin every time that I implemented this strategy in the class. In 16 studies, reciprocal teaching proved consistent and effective. Small group learning had an effect size of 0.47. Anytime you get over 0.5, it's very effective. If we look at Hattie's research here, research, we look at positive peer influences, the collaboration that takes place within reciprocal teaching. It had 0.53 effect size. Self-questioning strategies that the reader will process through as they're reading and within their group. So they had a 0.53. Transfer, taking the knowledge they learned from the reciprocal teaching and then be able to apply that knowledge maybe for a different social studies project or science project down the road. We're looking at 0.86. Summarizing, we know, has an effect size of 0.79, which is the summarizer's role. Prediction has an effect size of 0.76. Classroom discussion. Oftentimes after each team writes their summary, we have a discussion where each team will share their summary, and then we discuss what we learned from each other's summaries. So there are many extensions you can do within using reciprocal teaching. And that had an effect size of 0.82. And then reciprocal teaching overall has a very high effect size of 0.74. So the research is very, very strong. And if you look into Hattie's work, it's really easy to read his research and understand what we're doing as teachers and what works and what doesn't. So If you have some pertaining questions, I think that would be a great place to start as far as looking into reciprocal teaching would be some of Hattie's work, which I find to be very valuable. Please make a new group of 3 or 4 people that you have not spoken to today or not worked with today, if possible. And I would like you to share and discuss your thinking about these 4 process questions. Will you consider adding reciprocal teaching to your practice? Why or why not? And what might be some of those benefits or some of your reasons why you would choose not to? What research stat is most convincing to you and why? Um, and you can go ahead and use that resource page. I can put that back up for you to reference. Um, what roadblocks do you anticipate as a teacher, or things that may cause fear when thinking about implementing this strategy? And how can your literacy coach further support you? What would you need as a teacher? Some co-planning, maybe some modeling, some observation. What do you think would help support you the most when considering implementing this into your classroom? Here are some additional resources. I put 6 sources down here that are very valuable when looking at how to implement reciprocal teaching or how valuable it is within the classroom. Again, you can see Hattie's work, Visible Learning, is listed there. That is a great book with deep research upon many different studies. And Reciprocal Teaching at Work is really a great text to learn how to implement it in various ways. So those are some good starting points if you want to find some more research as far as how to move forward with reciprocal teaching. Thank you for giving me the time today to present this. Again, you may contact me via my email at any time. And if you need any additional support or resources, most of the resources in this presentation are hyperlinked and able for you to view and print off and use. And I hope that you found this presentation beneficial and that it gives you another tool within your toolbox to support students with their comprehension.